of the Senate Standing Committee on Families and Children for the 2024 regular session. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Senator Chambers Armstrong, Senator Elkins, Senator Girdler, Senator Mays Bledsoe, Senator Meredith, Senator Tishner, Senator Webb, Senator Westerfield, here. Senator Wise, Vice Chair Rocky Adams, Chairman Carroll.
Here. We do have a quorum and are duly authorized to conduct business. Madam Chair.
Thank you. Secretary, please call the roll.
Representative Baker.
Here.
Representative Kleins.
Here.
Representative Decker.
Here.
Representative Dietz.
Here.
Representative Elliott. Here. Representative Fleming. Representative Gooch. Representative Proctor. Representative Rayburn. Representative Raymond. Representative Rorks. Representative Wilner. Representative Wilson. Here. Vice Chair Riley. Here. Chair Heverin.
Here. Thank you. We are duly constituted to do business today. We are having a legislative hearing on the 2024 Social Services Block Grant and State Plan. Misty Salmons and Laura Beacon, if you can go ahead and make your way to the table. Please introduce yourself for the record. Just a reminder, we can't hear you unless your green button is on. And you can get started as soon as you get set up.
Sorry, just 1 second. I wonder why it's not showing up. Okay, well, it's on this one. Okay, sorry about that. Good morning. My name's Laura Began, Staff Assistant for the Department for Community-Based Services.
Good morning. I'm Misty Salmons. I'm the Director for the Division of Administration of Financial Management for DCBS.
Thank you for inviting us here today to present. This is our annual update on the Social Services Block Grant. This block grant is a federal grant of approximately $20 million that we receive per year for our social services, predominantly adult protective services and child protective services. As we'll get into, this is just a fraction of the money that is spent on these programs, but we're still, of course, very appreciative to have this federal funding. DCBS administers 5 block grants on topics such as assistance for needy families, child care, community services, utility assistance, and social services. So just as a little summary of why we are here today, to receive these block grants, these are not competitive grants. These block grants have been around for decades, and the federal government knows that we will be submitting a plan for them, and we plan to get that money. The only requirement is that we submit a state plan showing how we will meet the national goals associated with the block grant. For SSBG and also for LIHEAP block grant, we submit a state plan every year that details how we will meet those goals. So that is why we present to you every year. KRS Chapter 45 requires that we submit a preliminary state plan to the Legislative Research Commission before submitting the final plan. So the preliminary plan has been submitted and is in the meeting materials on the LRC website for this committee for anyone who's interested. And we will be submitting the final plan in May and continue to receive, again, that approximately $20 million. So just DCBS overview. You're all probably very familiar with the department. We have almost 5,000 employees in all across the state. We have offices in every county across the state providing social services, public assistance, and many other programs and services that we'll get into in a little bit. And of course, in addition to our almost 5,000 employees statewide, we have partners all across the state that help with these programs as well. Just a little picture showing our regions within DCBS. Again, the block grants and the topics that they cover. Here's just a little snapshot of the programs that are funded through block grants that we administer, many that you and your constituents are familiar with, I'm sure. So I won't get into all the details of the history and purpose of the social services block grant, but again, it's been around for decades, has these national goals that we achieve through our social service programs. Here are the state programs funded through this. Again, predominantly adult protective services and child protective services, but a portion of those approximately $20 million are spent on these other social services as well. And staff training, of course. Let's see, I'll turn it over to my colleague Misty to talk a little bit about the budget.
I'll let you roll on.
Yeah.
So we use the following annual goals to create the SSBG budget. The programs that are required to be administered by statute, prior and present, service utilization, funds available, information obtained in surveys, focus groups, etc. We use historical data on trends and then the availability of other funds for services. Funds provided for staff or service contracts with individuals and other public agencies or private providers to provide direct services, and these are state-mandated programs that are prioritized with general funds. This is a snapshot of the expenditures that have been used for SSBG over the last 2.5 years. So for state fiscal year 22, we got $22.7 million in federal funds, and we spent $167 million in state dollars. 23.9 million in federal and $193.4 million in state dollars. Year to date, as of yesterday, for state fiscal year 24, we have $13.9 million in federal and $152.2 in state dollars. The increase in state dollars is a direct relation to the pay increases for staff or social workers, and then the retention and recruitment that we've had on social workers, where we've increased our staff numbers.
And I'll just say there is no required match for these block grant funds. These general funds are what we spend on these programs anyway. So some block grants require a 90-10 match, things like that. This does not. And that's why that $20 million is really just goes towards these programs that we are statutorily required to administer anyway. So a little bit more on the programs funded. We just have a little snapshot of each of these. So adult protective services, protecting people aged 18 or older unable to manage their own resources or carry out activities of daily living. Just like with child protective services, the definitions around this program are defined in statute. So KRS Chapter 209 defines what an adult is for the as it relates to this program, abuse, neglect, and exploitation. As you can see, self-neglect is the biggest issue in adult protective services, usually referred by physicians. If an adult, if they have decision-making capabilities or capacities, then they really guide what this looks like, how we can support them, and how engaged they want to be with adult protective services. We have received federal grants, especially recently, that allow us to provide more resources to them if there's a specific need that they have that will address that self-neglect. Sorry, here's where we get into the slides where you can really see that self-neglect is the predominant issue here. So we also use SSBG towards child protective services, safeguarding the welfare of children, and to get into, we've provided this graph before, and I just think it's very valuable as it shows 4 years worth of data. To kind of walk you through. This first number is all of the Child Protective Services reports that we receive. Some of these may not actually be Child Protective Services related, but it's all reports made to the hotline or through the web portal. And then that gets refined to actual Child Protective Services, reports that actually had allegations, ones that met criteria, Substantiated or services needed finding, where services needed would be where we can provide resources to address the issue. And then finally, just reports that were substantiated. Types of child protective services, maltreatment, and I just wanted to point out here, although it looks like physical abuse is a very large column here in this graph, there are varying forms of neglect, and neglect still does make up the majority of child protective services substantiations at 52.1%. Senate Bill A from regular session 2022 did a great job in clarifying that poverty is not neglect, as we receive many reports that are more poverty related to child protective services, where we can they may not meet the criteria for investigation, but we can still provide resources. Or if they're low risk and it does still meet criteria, again, we can, you've probably heard us talk about alternative response in recent years, where we can have a more collaborative approach with families instead of just an investigative response, again, for low risk allegations. So we also provide home safety services with SSBG, and that would really be like aftercare services, wraparound services for family and children in their community. Juvenile services, we provide funding to the Department of Juvenile Justice. We kind of act as a pass-through for some of these SSBG funds. Residential treatment services, of course, we mentioned those partners that we work with earlier, how valuable they are all across the state, and residential treatment that they provide. And staff training, again, almost 5,000 employees. Many of those are frontline. Frontline staff currently undergo 6-week training, annual training, and then other training as needed. Many of you have heard about really focused training that we've been doing the past few months. We had a lot of turnover during the pandemic, and many staff who undertook training, and we're kind of redoing some of that training again, some of it in person. Just to make sure that again, our very new staff have all the supports that they need, support and education that they need. Are there any questions?
Any questions from the Senate members? Hearing none, could I have a Senate motion to accept the block grant? Have a motion, Senator Merritt, second, Senator Westerfield. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Block grant is accepted by the Senate.
Do any House members have questions? Do I have a motion on the Social Services Block Grant State Plan from the House? Motion by Representative Wilson, second by Representative Fleming. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The Social Services Block Grant is adopted by the House.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I need a motion for adjournment for the House. Motion by Vice Chair Riley. We are adjourned.
Senate members, please stand at ease. Okay, we'll call the Senate meeting back to order. We have one item on the agenda. It is House Bill 271. And I would ask the sponsor, Representative Wilson, and I think you have others who will be sitting with you, or just you?
Chair Hebron.
Yeah. Chair Hebron. Please introduce yourselves for the record, and you have the floor.
Representative Nick Wilson, 82nd District, Whitley County and Laurel County.
State Representative Samara Heffron, 18th District. I represent all of Grayson County and a portion of Hardin County.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We're here today on House Bill 271. This started, well, first, a few years ago, changes in federal requirements for funding caused the cabinet to begin using a new safety model for dependency, neglect, and abuse complaints that was called standardized decision making. In our first House Family and Children Committee meeting, we had some family judges. They came and testified about noticing fewer petitions being filed in their courts. So this led to a working group that everyone had input. There was some of us representatives, many family court judges, as well as the cabinet, and we all come up with some changes that we thought would help the process get some more cases in front of the judges. House Bill 271 started as allowing written reports, which more accurately online submissions, email, website type of submissions, as well as the phone calls. One of the biggest issues that led to this was the incredibly long wait times for a call of a child abuse complaint. Sometimes they would be on hold for an hour and a half, 2 hours.
Keep going.
Okay. So some of the other changes we made, the written report I think would help greatly because of those hold times I mentioned. I think it's only a few years that the new decision-making process has been going. Putting some of these into statutory definitions is going to be very helpful. Defining the safety plan, defining statewide reporting system, putting these into KRS is going to be helpful. Also, the reporting requirements that we will implement, which would be our committees receiving these reports, especially the number of complaints. Like one of the slides just showed, over 100,000 child abuse, neglect, dependency complaints last year, only 40,000 investigations. And that's the kind of thing these judges were pointing to, saying we've actually lost children in our judicial circuits. We've seen children dying that there were reports and there were never investigations because it didn't meet the standardized decision-making criteria for an investigation. We also added a couple of situations where an automatic investigation would be required. One of those is if there's two unique professional reporting services within a 30-day period. So that would be like teachers, police officers, doctors, judges. If there are two unique of those, it's an automatic investigation, despite what the computer program says, despite what the calls to Frankfurt, no matter what, the investigation would take place. And then if a child is removed from a home for a period of 14 days or longer, sometimes there will be what's called a safety plan, which would require removal from a home. Basically, if that child must be removed for 14 days or longer, we think that deserves for the case to be investigated in front of a judge.
We do have a motion and a second. A couple questions that I would like to ask. And I spoke with Secretary Freelander, and he was very complimentary of the changes and willingness to work together to get to this product. And honestly, I had not received any pushback at all until yesterday afternoon, and then they started rolling in. And these are social workers who are concerned about two parts of the bill. On page 16, line 9, in determining the best interest of the child, the court shall have access to the entire protection and permanency record of the child that is prepared, owned, used, in the possession of, or retained by the cabinet. There is a concern that those files contain information about bogus reports, all types of information that would be really beyond the scope of the court's need to see. And there is concern about the amount of information that's going to be required to be redacted to provide to the courts, which may or may not be a legitimate concern. I don't know if redaction has to take place when it's sent to the courts, but they are concerned about the amount of information and the types of information that really is not necessary for the court to see. And there could possibly be, try to remember this correctly, circumstances that came up that were false allegations or just beyond the scope that's not substantiated information, where names could be viewed by the court in certain cases. So that was one concern. The other concern had to do with the sheer number of reports. And, you know, over recent years, we've been able to increase the number of social workers. We've made progress in that, and I think there is fear that we're going to be right back where we were, where because of the number of reports and the number of required investigations, that the quality of those investigations could suffer. And again, I'm only passing along what I was told, and this is numerous emails that I received. So can you all respond to those two concerns?
Yes, I'll kick us off, Mr. Chairman. First off, I think we've got to remember when we're talking about this, these are kids. These are our Kentucky kids, and the judges came to us because kids are dying and that they're not being caught in the centralized intake system. And, you know, I've had a lot of constituents come to me, and I know Nick's been in the realm of being an attorney. There are a lot of families that will, you know, a lot of people that will submit reports to centralized intake and they never get caught. And, you know, then we've got kids dying or kids getting abused when they should have been removed from the home. And, you know, Senator Carroll, this is a conversation we've probably had, and you've heard during the interim of I said this. At what point do kids have rights? The parents don't have a right to abuse their kids. And so I understand that the concern of increasing the investigation, but we also have a lot of kids falling through the cracks. And, you know, both of us serving on the child fatality panel, we hear a lot of concerns that these kids all had DCBS backgrounds. And I think that was one of the reasons why we wanted to make sure that judges got to see that. That was a request from the judges. And, you know, I just had a conversation with Sarah. You know, we're happy to do a floor amendment if that's really the need to make sure that judges have a fact sheet. But I would really hate for this legislation to die just because of that one thing. You know, time is of the essence right now. I find it interesting that those emails came when this bill has been going on since February. It's been a very open conversation. I think we probably had a 20-group stakeholder conversation on this. But I did make my commitment to Sarah. You know, I would work with her during the interim, and Sarah's the Cabinet for Health and Family Services and Secretary Friedlander's office. I'm happy to work with them during the interim to come up with a fact sheet that we can use. But I don't know that the judges would always use this opportunity to pull all the information. In the legislation, it is a request. And so I would really hate, we're open to do a floor amendment, but in the essence of time, I really think that it's something that we could work on during the interim and come back. This is a continued conversation. You know, this is really a conversation that came to, we just want to start doing the right thing and making sure that kids aren't falling through the cracks. Because if we're not there to advocate for them, who's going to advocate for them? And for the increased, the social workers being concerned with the increased investigations, I understand, and we want to be able to help them, but it's also their job. And so I think it's really important for us to be able to have that conversation and look at it. But also remember the root of this is we're here to help Kentucky's children. And that's been a theme from the majority party for the last several years. And so just continuing that. And I'll let my colleague add anything else.
One of the things, well, a couple of things we saw as we were having this conversation with judges and with the cabinet and learning more about the process of a complaint being made and an investigation beginning, one thing that jumped out to me was this structure, standardized decision-making model, this computer program, is essentially adjudicating. The standards got so strict that just to begin an investigation, it was almost essentially adjudicating the case using discretion that I think judges should be using. So while we do have the program and we do have a need for weeding out bogus complaints, as you said, or not being too strict and not over-investigating, that's not the problem we're seeing right now. We're seeing too few investigations. Another thing I think we saw, and this goes to the kind of workforce question, was a lot of these children, if there were multiple complaints, a lot of times it was the same families, the same children. So some of these complaints that are not being investigated, a social worker is going to end up investigating. They're going to end up doing that work anyways because there's multiple complaints on same families. So, and obviously we're obviously grateful for our social workers. We're going to be willing to provide any help they need.
Senator Webb.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As a practitioner who's done this going on 4 decades and still doing it, I have some of the same concerns that the chairman brought forth. And, child abuse or neglect, dependency is a terrible thing, but it's also a terrible thing to be accused of when it's not real. And, I've seen the system abused quite a bit, whether it's to gain an advantage in a divorce or gain an advantage some other way. And I know, if I were queen for a day, there's a lot I'd change about the system and the cabinet and the processes. And actually, many times I've told the cabinet, if you want to bring a case, I'll see you in court, but we're not cooperating until you do that. Because I think it's somewhat onerous and heavy-handed sometimes without what I would call probable cause to intervene in someone's life. So I see both sides, and I have some of the same concerns. But I do think that you have I feel the judge's pain, but I do feel representing parties in these actions that a lot of this information could be more prejudicial and biased than beneficial. And the court, should be able to perhaps go back and get that, but I feel that, but I'm just had the same question sitting here reading the bill, and as we cut budgets like we do sometimes for certain areas, it is a concern. We want the investigations done right. We don't want them glossed over. We've been through periods in the past where the budgets have not been enough to where they do gloss over these things, and then they can blame the budget or whatever for not doing their job. But I think we have to look at this in the lens of budget capacity and workforce complement, and get all the information we can on where the incidents are most likely, which we do have some data on that. But I think the conversation, this bill moves forward, it needs to continue along those lines and bring some practitioners in that represent other individuals in this process. Thank you.
If I may respond.
Please.
And we have had practitioners, and I've done J cases. Representative Dietz has helped. She's done this for many, many years. And we do see a difference in that. That's the reason, the difference between a complaint from a professional versus a family member, an ex-husband, or a new boyfriend, or we've all seen those situations play out. So I did want to point out we did anticipate that in this bill. We did make a difference. The automatic investigations only come from professional sources, and that's doctors and police officers and teachers and people that you would think would not have a vested interest for some sort of unfounded complaint or some other motive there.
And I'll add one more thing, Mr. Chairman, if it's okay. Senator Webb, thank you for your comments. Whenever we started this, we started the conversation in January. We had weekly meetings of a working group that include family judges, attorneys, CASA, PCAC, Prevention of Child Abuse Awareness Kentucky. The cabinet was very involved. We had a really large group of stakeholders that we felt that provided information on both sides. And luckily, I always say the experiences that we bring to the General Assembly are fantastic sometimes. And so, Representative Wilson, Representative Deeds both practice in this. And so, it was really, this was very a thoughtful piece of legislation. But I do appreciate your comments.
Chairman Meredith, you have a question, sir?
But more of a comment, Mr. Chair, and I commend you for bringing the bill. And to my colleagues here, I guess my mantra for the rest of my legislative career, ever long that might be, is see a problem, fix a problem. There's a problem here, obviously. And I think to do nothing is the worst course of action we can possibly take. I appreciate Senator Webb's comments. Certainly her expertise in this area is invaluable. And there are two sides of this. But if we're going to choose a side, I'm going to choose the side of the children. You've only got one chance to be a child, and we're destroying that chance for many, many children. And I'd rather be wrong on that side than wrong on the other side. If people see a problem, they need to bring solutions to us rather than throwing 1,000 roadblocks in our way as to why we can't do something. If this doesn't work, tell me what does. But we can't continue going down this road and not protect our most vulnerable population, which is our children. So thank you for your bill. And if we missed it, we'll come back next session and we'll fix it. It's what we do.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Elkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I, too, would like to thank you for bringing this bill. More of a comment than a question as well. The bill is, it appears to me that it was very well thought out, in that the automatic investigations are to be done by or if they're reported by a professional, or trigger an automatic investigation. And I also think that if we're going to ask our judges to determine the best interest of the child, we're going to have to give them all of the information we can give them and expect them to do what they do best, and that's sort through that information and come out with what they figure is what they believe to be the truth. Finally, I would reiterate what Senator Meredith said, in that if we're going to err, let's err on the best interest of the child. I can't imagine being accused of child abuse when it wasn't true, but I also can't imagine overlooking it when it is. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the bill.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Titchener.
Just a brief question, and I do appreciate this bill sitting through. I actually listened to that House testimony with the judges that came, and that was quite shocking. You mentioned the standardized computer-generated model criteria. Can you, I'm kind of new around here, can you give me a little bit more information on how that system operates for intake?
So this began in, I think, 2020 as a result of federal requirements. So a lot of people would just want it to go back to the way it was before standardized decision making. We can't do that. We would lose federal funding. So the standardized decision making, basically, and correct me if I get anything wrong, every call will go through Frankfurt, where a social worker in Frankfurt will run the complaint, and they use basically a decision model on this computer, or on a computer, that's the platform, the program they use, and at the end of that program, they will decide whether an investigation should be made or not. So a lot of the time we spent in these working groups was discussing, okay, well, what is that program? What is the standardized decision making? What questions do they ask, and how do they define things? We found that what we call in the courtroom, I think I want to say neglect was termed, had a totally different term over there. Basically, there was two words for the same definition, where a judge would call it one thing and this program called it another. So it's just fallen short. The last few years, it has just, like someone said, we could work on it, I think. And that's why we're here.
Yeah, just a few things, Senator Tishner. I think the point of the centralized intake was to make it unbiased. Used to it was in 120 counties. It was all very local, and so I'm not exactly sure on the location of the call center. I think it's Louisville, or it's everywhere in Kentucky. It's regional, and so it's a software program that the person answering the phone answers a series of questions, and so they would ask questions on the phone or through email if they receive those, and so it's a software program that you answer questions, and then the software decides if you've met criteria or not, and that was kind of the rub with the judges was it doesn't meet criteria according to the software, and so that's why we wanted to put some of that stuff in statute to make sure that the next time that there is an RFP, a request for proposal, that we're looking at that to make sure that when we're having those conversations that it's going to match. But I also want to commend Commissioner Dennis too. She's been right there along the way having the conversations and talking about listening to the judges. And I think sometimes when we're all in three different branches of government, there's some disconnect because we all think, we're all seeing in our own tunnel vision. And so really bringing all three branches of government together, recognizing that there's a separation of powers, but seeing, okay, well, from my perspective as a judge, this is how it looks. From my perspective as a legislator, this is how it looks. And as my position in the executive branch, this is how it looks. And so I think one of the biggest things was just convening everyone to kind of say the judicial system sees that the centralized intake a little differently. Are they really meeting the statute, the criteria of the statute? But I hope that answers your question. But it's just a series of questions from the software program.
If you don't mind, Mr. Chairman, it seems like maybe there needs to be that human element, and maybe, and I may have missed it in the bill, if it doesn't meet what the computer says, what those generated questions say requires investigation, is there a place where a human who answers that call says, I think this actually does. I'm not going to go by the book because the book seems to be off. And I have a gut feeling in my experience as a social worker that this child might be actually in harm. Can they overstep the criteria? Is there any room for humans' knowledge and intuition and background to be able to step in and still use the criteria, because I guess it's tied to federal funding, but also be able to use their own knowledge and background?
If I remember correctly, I think there is a review by a supervisor, because I had this conversation with Secretary Friedlander because I had those concerns, and there are processes in place to make sure that there's not something being missed, if I remember correctly. Okay.
Yes, there are screens that you can take notes, but I think that there's the opportunity, as Chairman Carroll said, that there can be a human element to it, but it really is an opportunity. And I understand, Senator Tishner, of the opportunity to be unbiased. Kind of to Senator Webb's point, if it's a bogus complaint, because sometimes people do. They call in retaliation if it's maybe a nasty divorce or, a bad situation in relationships. And I think that there is a thought that, hey, maybe we can weed out some of those, but I just don't want to weed out the cases that really do need to be looked at. And that's been our full intent the entire time.
Absolutely. And we're not here to say what's going on is wrong or bad. We just want to say let's all work together to make it even better.
And I'm not a fan of the regional model because it comes from a career of working with social workers every day, and they know the families, they know the histories, and there's just a different level of credibility when something's called in where they know, and we've lost that. But I do understand the necessity of the regional system, and we need to make it as foolproof as we can to protect the kids. And I'm all for that. That's just where we are today, and I think you're right. Going back to the 120 county system, it's just not going to happen. So we need to make the best of what we got. I do want to stress, the social workers that contacted me, their concerns are the same as ours, and I don't want to hold up the bill, and I have faith that during the interim these issues will be addressed, and I think not to hear from our social workers would be not be good, because they are the front line and they deal with this every day, and they see what's happening, and maybe they're seeing some things that maybe we missed, or even the cabinet administration missed. So, but Senator Meredith's right. We can make adjustments as we need to, and hopefully we can do that during the interim if it calls for. Any other questions? We do have a motion and a second, and Madam Secretary, if you would please call the roll.
Senator Rocky Adams, Senator Chambers Armstrong, Senator Elkins, Senator Girdler, Senator Mays Bledsoe, Senator Meredith, Senator Tishner, Senator Webb, Senator Westerfield, Senator Wise, Chairman Carroll.
Aye. Vote of 7-0. Bill passes with favorable expression. Do we have a motion for consent? So moved. Have a motion. Is there a second? Senator Elkins, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. Bill will be carried on the consent agenda. Representatives, thank you so much. Appreciate you bringing this bill forward. Appreciate all your work to prepare this bill. Again, Secretary Friedlander was very complimentary, and appreciate you all working through the process to come up with the best product. There are no other items to be brought before the committee. We stand adjourned.
Sometimes answering the questions is tough. Yeah.
I was hoping so, but I thought legislative session and what they